Hi, everybody, and welcome to this talk where we're going to be talking about some of the Grow technologies in Firebase. And we're going to take a little bit of hands-on advice on how to use them. So instead of just showing oh, this partner did this, we're actually going to show what they did, and then we'll try to be hands-on in showing you how they did it so we can learn from partners of Google who've been very successful with the Grow technologies. I'm Lawrence Moroney, and
I'm Alex Geboff.
And the Firebase Grow technologies are primarily built so that you can have a strategy for growth. Growth is one of those things that it's something that everybody wants, but sometimes very few of us know really how to do it in a systematic way. Often when we want to build an application, we'll put it into a Play Store, we'll put it into the App Store, and we hope for the best. We might have a marketing campaign to draw people to it. We might buy AdWords and those kind of things to draw people to it. But we've all seen those curves where once we launch the app, we do our campaign for our installs are here, the following week they're here, the following week they're gone. So a lot of the times, if we really want to have a good sustained growth thing, we need a strategy to do so. Growth isn't a lottery ticket, and something like Slashdot becomes your lottery ticket so that when your app gets Slashdotted, you can have great growth. But we really want to think about how do you do that sustained programmatic growth, and we're going to talk about some of Google's partners that did that.
Thank you. So in this session, we're going to go beyond the theory a little bit and talk about a couple of companies that have actually implemented these growth technologies with real-world examples. And then we'll show you a little coding demo of how you can do it yourself in your app. So we'll start with Yahoo Japan, who have the largest auction site in Japan in their market. And they also have used app indexing and public content indexing to drive growth and re-engagement for their Android app. Then we'll move on to Skyscanner, who have used invites and dynamic links to differentiate themselves in a crowded travel app market. And finally, last but not least, we will talk about Cookbook, who've differentiated themselves as a recipe app using remote config to provide tailored custom experiences to their global audience. So let's go ahead and get started with Yahoo Japan.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you. First of all, any Firebase developers here? A few. Oh, nice catch. I have a few Firebase t-shirts to launch into the crowd. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about Yahoo Japan. And this is a terrific application. And we're probably familiar with Yahoo, but Yahoo Japan is really, really huge in Japan. They're one of the largest search engines. They're one of the biggest on mobile in particular. And they built this thing, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, called Yahoo Oku, which is an auction site in Japan. And Yahoo Oku has 16 million mobile users and about 10 million web users, and it's growing all the time. And they were looking for a strategy to increase retention of their app, to increase the people's user experience as they're using their app, and to increase just basically usage of their app so that they could grow it. So they took a look at app indexing, and they took a look at personal content indexing. And as far as I know, the date that the app went live was on May 10th. And I learned about this app 3 weeks ago when they started building it. So they were actually able to integrate this stuff in about 3 weeks. And the personal content indexing part of it that Alex is going to teach us about, they were actually able to integrate in, can you guess how long? 1 hour. That's all it took to be able to implement personal content indexing. And if Alex was on the team, they would have done it in half an hour, but...
Not likely.
So to talk a little bit about it, if you aren't familiar with app indexing is a technology that if you have content on a web, if you have content on a website, and you have the same content in an app, that you can link the two of these together. In Android, you link them with an asset links file. In iOS, you link them with universal links. And the logic behind this, if you think about it, makes sense because if users have spent the time and effort to install your app on their device, they've already sent a signal that says, I want to consume this type of content in this app. And as Google then, with our search engine, as it's crawling the web, searching for that type of content, if it sees that asset link or if it sees that universal link on your site, that contains the footprint of the application itself, and they'll say, hey, this user really wants to engage with this type of content in app. So then when this user, as part of their daily routine, they're using their search app on their device multiple times a day, that now when they're searching, instead of being taken to a website with a lot of blue links, it's like saying, hey, this type of content, they like to consume it in this app, and then they're able to open it in that app and get that type of rich experience. So let's take a look at it. If we were building an app, Alex, how would we integrate app indexing?
So to integrate app indexing and get your app content indexed in Google search results, you really only need to do two things. The first is to set up deep links in your app that map to URLs on your website. And the second is to create a site-app association to verify ownership of both your website and your app. And ultimately what that does is, it signals that you own your app, and your app should be the one handling all of these links. So when a user clicks on your link in Google search results on their device, they go directly to content in your app and skip that disambiguation dialog. Otherwise known as the app chooser, I think, is the colloquial name. So to implement this in Android, you use Android app links, and we're going to go through how you would do that in Android Studio, because we have this handy app links assistant that guides you through every step of creating Android app links, setting up deep links in your app, adding logic to handle the incoming URL, and then also generating that digital asset links file that verifies ownership of your site and your app. So first, you would actually map URLs from your site to activities in your Android app. So you go ahead and click that Open URL Mapping Editor, and it opens this fun GUI, and you add the URL, and you can set a path specifically, a path pattern, or a path prefix, which we have here, because we want everything that's recipeapp.com/recipe to go to our recipe activity. And then you hit OK. And then this adds the following code to your Android manifest file. And as you can see, it's essentially routing every recipeapp.com/recipe URL to the recipe activity. Then once users get to your recipe activity, you need to actually pull up and show the right recipe based on that URL. So you add logic to handle the intent. And you select activity from the App Links Assistant, select the right activity, and it adds some boilerplate code to your recipe activity, which you can then customize to fit your needs. And once you've done all that, you open the digital asset links file generator and enter some information about your site, some information about your recipe, or some information about your app. It doesn't have to be a recipe app, but it should be. And generate the digital asset links file. You save that file and then upload it to your site, and then you skip that disambiguation dialog. And you can test this on the Android Studio emulator, or you can use tools to test it from our documentation. Yep.
So another part of the technology is personal content indexing. And anybody want to index some personal content here? So let me try. Whoops. I think I need more pressure
on that one.
I need to turn up the pressure. The last time I used this in a session, I hit one of those lighting gantries. I have to be really careful. So another part of this is the personal content indexing technology. So when you've got app indexing, where the Google search engine is crawling the web, finding the content that links with your app. But then, of course, there's content that you generate in your app that's personal to you, that you want to keep on the device, but you also want to be able to search on the device. And a really great use for this one is what Yahoo did with their auction site. Like, I'm somebody that visits a lot of auction sites. I love visiting, like, eBay, the auction site, because I have a strange taste in obscure Welsh rugby jerseys. And I rarely get to go to Wales to actually buy one, so I usually go crawling around eBay looking for them. But when you think about if you're searching for something like that, all of the parameters that you need to do, like in my case, Welsh rugby jersey, size, age, I want a new one, I don't want a used one, I want to know how much the shipping is, and there's all these kind of tweaks that I have to do to find the one that I want. And then every time I'm searching, I got to do the same thing again and again and again and again every day. So the idea behind this one is, like, in this case, the person has been searching for antiques, and they may be searching for, because antiques tend to be larger, they may be searching for one in a particular area so that they could pick it up locally instead of having it shipped. They could be searching for a particular style, a particular price, all of that kind of thing. And then that search itself can be saved as a favorite, and that's what the little star icon here is. And then once it's been saved as a favorite, then in the future, when they're searching on their device, when they search for something like antiques, you'll see over here on the right-hand side of the Google search app, there's this thing for finding in-app content. And that's the personal content. And this is content, it stays on the device, it's never sent to Google. The search application itself is indexing it on the device. So now when they're searching for content, like in this case, like antiques, those predefined searches saved for them will actually help them find this in-app content so they can re-engage and go directly into that app. And that's the really neat thing about this, because it's growth through re-engagement. A lot of the ways that you lose your users is that you're yet another app on their device amongst the 300 other apps that they have. But if this is something that's part of their daily workflow searching, like in my case, searching for rugby jerseys, in their case, searching for antiques, then it's something that you can actually have your app become part of their daily workflow. And once it's part of the daily workflow, they're remembering it when they're upgrading their phone next year, that's one of the apps that comes along. When they're using their phone on a daily basis, that's one of the apps that they're actually discovering. And Alex is going to show us how they were actually able to code that in as short a time as they did.
Yeah. So largely, once you've indexed all of your content, those links will start showing up in Google search results. Personal content builds an on-device index, and those links show up in the in-app search on Android. So it is Android only. But you do create these fabulous indexable objects in your app, and you can create custom indexable objects like this. For example, for an auction app, you would say you want a saved auction and whatever the URL is. And you only need to set the name and set the URL, and then all the extra parameters you can actually decide for yourself based on whatever you need for your indexable objects. And then we can show you how that'll look on our demo device when you're searching for it.
If we can switch to the demo machine, please.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, amazing.
Nice catch.
So you can see we have the recipe app up. And if I go to Google and I search for pierogi poutine, which I have searched for before because it looks delicious, and then I go to my in-apps tab, and you can see I have added a note here that says pierogi poutine, this is amazing. And if I click that, it pulls up the pierogi poutine recipe. And then I can change my note and say like, oh my God, seriously? So good.
I think they're serving it tonight.
And then update that. And then theoretically, my note will show up in in-apps. And you can see again, it says, oh my God, seriously, so good. This is an on-device index, so you don't have to wait for Google to crawl that. We can go ahead and switch back to the slides.
So let's now look at another partner. So we saw how Yahoo Japan were able to use the app indexing and the personal content indexing technology to drive re-engagement and to build a greater user experience. This other app is Skyscanner. And what Skyscanner are is that they're a travel search site, and it's the typical thing when we do travel search. We're looking for flights or boats or hotels or cars or things to do. And there are a lot of these applications out there, and there are a lot of these services out there. So what Skyscanner really wanted to do was to find some way to distinguish themselves. They felt they had a great offering, they had great prices that you could find, and they ended up with like 50 million plus monthly users. And how would they distinguish themselves? So one way that they did was like, hey, we believe that you're finding the best bargains with us, and we're going to help you help your friends find those same bargains. I always like to say that friends help friends discover great apps, and friends help friends discover great content. And they did so using app invites, which is part of Firebase. Has anybody used app invites? Are you familiar with it? Okay, a few of you, cool. So what app invites is that it's a built-in thing that uses the system UI for app sharing. But the app sharing, the most important part of this, there's two really important parts. Number one is that it reduces friction of sharing by having an intelligently sorted contact list. I like to joke that my surname begins with M, and how many friends do you have?
Literally 10.
5,000?
I don't.
Tens of thousands. Okay, so like
Nope.
someone like Alex who's got like lots and lots of friends, if she was going to share with me, I'm halfway down the list because my surname begins with M. My name isn't Aaron, which would be nice because I'll be at the top of everybody's list. But the idea behind app invites and the dynamic sorting and the intelligent sorting is that if it's the day of week that she usually converses with somebody, if it's an app type that she usually shares with somebody, if I've installed the same type of apps, like maybe she's sharing a game and I've installed a lot of games that she shared with me in the past, I'm going to bubble to the top of that list. Again, reducing friction so that you, when you're building this in your app, are making it easier for your users to share this app with their friends. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that it's built on dynamic links. And dynamic links are actually really cool because what they actually do is that it's not just a link to your app in the Play Store or the App Store. This link contains context about the app. So for example, Alex was talking about pierogi poutine earlier on and how much she loves it. If she were to share a dynamic link for an app containing the recipe for pierogi poutine with me, and then I don't have this app installed, once I've installed this app, I'll be taken directly to the pierogi poutine activity instead of having to fish for it for myself. And that means I end up, again, with greatly, greatly reduced friction. And if you reduce the friction that it takes for friends to share content and apps with their friends, you're going to have a lot of success. And this is what Skyscanner had done. So they built this sharing into their app. But let's take a look at how the app invites would actually work. So if we could switch to the demo box. If you're at my Pirate Metrics talk earlier, you would have seen this app, which is called Really Friendly Chat, which is yet another chat app that we've built. And in this app, what we've done is we've implemented app invites on it. So if I click invite, it's actually, you see, it's spinning for a minute, and then these 6 people appear, and it's basically judged that these 6 people are the ones probably most likely to accept my app invite right now. You can see the top 2 left ones are Rebecca Maroney, who's my wife, and as a result, she generally answers my emails, hopefully. And so it's intelligently sorted it like that, so we're able to get these. But let's take a look at the code, what would be taken to build this. If we can switch back to the slides. So here's the code. So I've built this in Objective-C. I'm not really a Taylor Swift fan, sorry about that. And told you they'd laugh.
It breaks my heart.
And all I have to do is, there's an FIR invites object, and if I use that to create a dialogue, and then I set the delegate for this dialogue to be myself, I get that system UI that you've just seen. It looks and feels like what you have in other apps. It looks and feels like Drive, looks and feels like Gmail, all of those other ones. And I get that for these 2 lines of code. But not only that, I also get a callback if I set the delegate to the self. And in this callback, I can then do interesting things. In this case, I've done something not very interesting, and I'm just showing a dialogue that says, you've shared this app with 15 users, or whatever the number of users are. But think about the things that you could do here, for example, if you're using analytics. You could have a custom analytic here that then says, Lawrence shared this app with 15 people successfully. Let's give Lawrence some reward points. Let's give Lawrence, or people who've shared a number of apps like that, let's set up a custom analytic for them. And then when you use something like remote config that I'll be showing you earlier on, you can have rewards driven to this person. So again, friends help friends discover great content. Friends help friends discover great apps. And here's a mechanism that's built in that you can use to reward them for doing that, so you can achieve that kind of explosive growth.
So as Lawrence mentioned, this technology is built on top of dynamic links, which you can also use on their own. Dynamic links are URLs that you can use across platforms to create these custom experiences, and you can generate them programmatically within your app, or you can create them in the Firebase console. And they do, as he said, preserve URL state across the app install flow. So users get right to the content that they're supposed to land in, even though they've had to install the app first. And you can integrate this also with Google Analytics for Firebase, so you can get all of those awesome insights and build even better dynamic links and even better user experiences for your users. So as I said earlier, you can generate these programmatically within your app using the iOS Builder API or the REST API. So for example, my husband and I love to travel, and if I found a great deal on Skyscanner, I could go ahead and click that link from within the app, send him the flight deal, and say, hey, you should check this out, and he'll go right to the flight deal, even if he has to install the app first. I can also, as Lawrence was saying earlier, if I have this pierogi poutine recipe or this wedge salad recipe or whatever recipe in my recipe app that I want to blog about, and I want to link users directly to that recipe in my recipe app. Good God, could I say recipe one more time? I could just go ahead and include a dynamic link in my blog post and send users right to that recipe in my recipe app. And we will show you how to go ahead and create a dynamic link in the Firebase console. So if we could switch to the demo device.
And while they're switching to the demo device.
Yeah. So as you can see, we've created a dynamic link before. We're going to create a new one here. And you go ahead and add this. Let's not make it the wedge salad. Let's make it the good old pierogi poutine. There's also like a potato salad in here that's really good. And you can say pierogi if I spell it right. And then you can open this in your iOS app, select your iOS app from the list, or you can open this in, if you create it for your Android app, your Android app will show up here. And then you can set a bunch of custom parameters here for what behavior you want if users don't have your app installed, or if they're on an iPad, or if you want to add any sort of parameters to it. We'll just go ahead and click Next, and then you create a dynamic link. And then it shows up right here. And then you can just copy that URL and put it right in your social media or blog post. And if you want to generate links programmatically from within your app, you would need this fabulous, unique URL here that you can just copy. And then if we could switch back to the slides. Once you've added your dynamic links, either generating them programmatically, did I just go? There we go. Either generating them programmatically from within your app or from the Firebase console, you need to receive links in your app. And this is a Swift example because I am a Taylor Swift fan. And you see you're receiving the URL here, and then you can extract whatever data, whatever parameters you put from it, and handle that link, either showing the deep linked content or providing a tailored onboarding experience. And we do actually have a lot of documentation on how to do that on our firebase.google.com doc site. So definitely check that out.
So you're tailoring their experience with Swift. That's what you're telling me?
You got it. And sticking with our recipe
That
app.
took me hours to prepare that joke.
He was really working on that for like days. So sticking with our recipe app theme, here we've got Cookbook, which is a real recipe app. And they use remote config and smart lock and Firebase auth to grow their signups 207%. So with remote config, they created a custom welcome and onboarding experience for their global audience. And with smart lock and Firebase auth, they reduced friction in signups and sign-ins. So if you're not familiar with remote config, what you can do with that is actually add configuration information for your app to the cloud. So you can create server-side variables, put them in your app, and then modify them in the Firebase console and update your app without having to redeploy it. And again, this is integrated with Google Analytics for Firebase, so you can modify the experience for segments of your users and deploy those updates without having to actually launch an update to your app based on those analytics insights. So in Cookbooks' case, they created these regional welcome screens. So if you were in Italy, you would see this Ciao Italia screen and a shot of Venice. If you were in India, you'd see the Taj Mahal. And if you were in the United States, you'd see this random bridge somewhere on the West Coast. What bridge is that, do you think?
What's that?
What bridge is that, do you think?
I think that's the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
Is that the Brooklyn Bridge?
I don't know. No, it's on the best coast.
Oh, it's on the other coast.
Yeah.
Okay. Oakland Bridge? Oh.
And so now Lawrence is going to show us how to do cool stuff in remote config.
I know it's the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm just teasing. So if we can switch to the laptop again, please. So I want to show an example of an app, not pierogi poutine, but an app that just shows an example of how Cookbook did what they did. So using remote config, you can customize somebody's onboarding experience. You can tailor their experience. And in this case, I was thinking, OK, I'm going to build a gratuitous app, an app which would be like a travel concierge if you're traveling to different countries. So for example, then when you launch the travel concierge and say I'm in China, it's going to give me this nice friendly greeting. It's traditional Chinese clothing. She's saying, ni hao, I'm May. And it's very welcoming, very Chinese kind of thing where I'd press get started to go. Now, what happens if I then go to Japan and I'd say, wouldn't it be really neat if I could have a Japanese onboarding experience? So I'm going to simulate that. If I just go to the home screen, and then from the home screen, if I go to settings, and then in settings, if I go to general, language and region, you can see I was in China. I'm now going to get on a plane and travel really quickly to Japan, and then continue, setting my region. Give that a moment. All right, and now if I go back to my home screen, then my region's set, and then I launch my application, and I'm in Japan. Now suddenly the same application has changed. The background color is Sakura pink. It's more of a traditional Japanese look and feel, and she's actually, instead of saying ni hao, I'm Mei, she's saying konnichiwa, I'm Kimiko. So very simple, very gratuitous thing. But think about if you're building this for 50 countries or 100 countries or 200 countries, and you're shipping this kind of functionality in your app, you're going to have a lot of if-then code. If this country, then that. If, then that image. If this country, then that text. And you're maybe having to do a lot of things a lot of that processing has to be done at startup, which as a result then would be slowing your app from actually starting up. So we said, OK, well, what would happen? What would this look like if we do this in remote config? Because the neat thing about remote config is you can drive then the content off of analytics. So in this case, there's an analytic for the country that the user is in. So then when I started the application, when I'd set my device country to Japan, that analytic was being fired, and then a remote config was being triggered off of that one. And if we can switch back to slides, I can show you what that would look like. All right, so actually, first I'll show you the code. So what the code is, it's a case of, for this application, you could see there were 3 dynamic elements. The first dynamic element was the image. The second dynamic element was the welcome text message that changed between Japanese and Chinese. And then the third one was the background color. So here, this is just Objective-C again, where, sorry, it's a little cropped off on the left. That's an NS string. Oh, no, you can see it on that side. So here it's like I'm just setting up an NS string for the URL string, and I'm calling self.remoteconfig. So this is part of the Firebase API, and I'm just saying, get the welcome image URL out of remote config, set that value. And that was the URL of the character, so it was just loading her image and then rendering it. The same thing for the welcome text message, the same thing for the page color. So I'm not doing any if-then kind of logic here to actually render the page for different countries. And now here is what remote config would look like. Now, because this is a gratuitous demo, I only had 2 countries. I had the Japanese thing for Japan, and I had the Chinese one for everybody else. So here you'd see in remote config, I've set the audience user in Japan to be an audience of everybody who are in Japan. And in this case, if the user in Japan analytic was set, then they were getting the Japanese pose.png file. If the user in Japan was set, then the welcome text message was, Konnichiwa, I'm Kimiko. And for everybody else, I was giving the default value. So if you're thinking if you've got 200 countries that you're managing, instead of writing the code to do that, you would set this configuration in a remote config, and then the code that you're maintaining would look something like the top of this slide. And then what would happen, as we can see here, was that the URL drove the character, the text drove the text that she was able to, that she was actually rendering. So we've seen, with a little bit of code and a little bit of walk around, how these growth technologies in Firebase have been used by real people. So some of the things, Yahoo Japan, as we saw, what they were able to do is this great auction app. And for me personally, that does a lot of auction stuff, that a lot of the friction of doing an auction, a lot of the friction of interaction with an auction was being taken away by the fact that I could save my preferences using personal content indexing. So we saw how they were able to do personal content indexing and how they were also able to do app indexing, at least in Android, by using the asset links file. Then for Skyscanner, we saw how they were able to get their growth and how they've been able to grow to where they are using app invites and using dynamic links. And Alex then showed us really nicely, I think, how we were able to use the Firebase console to generate a dynamic link. And you can share that dynamic link in social media, or using the API, you can generate those dynamic links so you can do it within an application. And then finally, Cookbook, who doubles their growth by having a simple sign up and sign in and remote config for an onboarding thing. We saw, I think, pretty simply how the code would be to do that. In this case, I did it in Objective-C. It's just as easy to do it in Android. So that's it. Those are the 3 partners that we've worked with. Those are the partners who've been able to achieve growth. And we hope by showing in a hands-on way how they were able to do it, that there's something new that everybody could learn. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of I/O.